Surprisingly few people have heard about the oldest city in Germany. But that's so pity. With its venerable age, it managed to see absolutely everyone, from the Celts and the ubiquitous Romans to the Franks. Even though nestled within modern Germany, it was the scene of a battle between France and Spain, became notorious for the witch hunt and managed to award honorary citizenship to notorious bastard. This is not to mention the fact that it significantly influenced the transformation of the Russian Empire into the USSR. I will show you all this, as well as many other things on this walk around the city of Trier, UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1986. A link to a map with all the points for an independent exploration will as always be in the description. Let's go! In general, you can and should walk around Trier, but then it's quite difficult to get to the Abbey of St. Matthias, which, as it happens, is located about 2 kilometers away from the city center. Reaching it by foot can be quite challenging, but you can get there by car. Fortunately, there's a very convenient parking available nearby. Ecclesiastical presence has graced this site since ancient times. As far back as the 5th century, Bishop Cyril preached to local monks, and even commissioned the construction of an oratory. His resting place lies here as well. As far as I understand, in the 5th century, Christianity has not yet divided not only into confessions, but even into orders, although Saint Benedict had already written his charter, according to which, from 977, the monastery of St. Matthias would become Benedictine. All the most interesting things are inside the monastery. But we'll go there a little later, and before diving deeper, let's pause to appreciate the medieval Baroque facade gracing the courtyard. It's of course younger than the church itself and was built in the 12th century. The facade itself seems to consist of two parts. The front lower part is classical Baroque, with decorations, sculptures and other curlicues, and the rear upper part is quite simple, although decorated at the top, apparently remaining from the pre-existing church. Stretching beyond the church, the facade seamlessly integrates with surrounding structures. I don't know what's behind the closed door, but behind the one with bars above which there are clearly figures of 3 bishops, there's a local cemetery. Surprisingly charming despite its purpose. And it's still active. To be honest, I thought that they weren't burying people here anymore. Before going inside the church, it's worth wandering around the courtyard. The monastery itself is not very busy, so everything is quite empty, and the fountain among the flowering linden trees with its murmur only sets off this monastic silence. But there's an unexpected artifact in the wall. Does anyone know what this is? This is what it looks like from the outside of the wall. In fact, this is a special design that allows you to monitor the street, but in such a way that the person watching is not visible. Stepping inside, the soaring airiness of Trier's churches immediately captivate. Whether in the monastery of St. Matthias or elsewhere, the absence of elaborate decorations and walls visible at all their height imparts an unexpected sense of spaciousness. This church itself was consecrated on January 13, 1148, although, of course, since then it's been completed and rebuilt many times. Now the decorations in the church include a couple of sculptures, stained glass windows, and plaques that are still incomprehensible to me. Some of them are clearly from some cities and communes. I can only assume that they were brought here by pilgrims who got here from those places. The reason why pilgrims went here is that here is the only place north of the Alps where the relics of one of the apostles are kept. In this case, Matthias, who replaced Judas Iscariot. I somehow thought that there was only one apostle with that name. And then I realized that there were actually two of them. One is a tax collector and he seems to be Matthew, and the second joined the team only after Judas split off, and he is Matthias. The remnants themselves seem to be stored in this chest. According to another legend, they were transferred here by Empress Helena, the mother of Constantine the Great, who later built Constantinople and the famous walls, which I showed in a separate video. As usual, the problem with these legends is that Helena supposedly passed them on here around the 4th century, and they were officially found only in the 12th. What happened to them and how did they wall them up for 800 years? Well, at least it's just one box. It's not like John the Baptist, for whom as many as 3 official heads are known. Above the sarcophagus, but no longer in the crypt, but in the cathedral itself, is somewhat like an official tombstone. Beautiful, but not very interesting, sorry. In the crypt, in addition to Matthias, 2 bishops rest, Eucharius and Valery, who in fact founded a bishopric here, which in the Middle Ages became one of the important ecclesiastical principalities of the Holy Roman Empire. But I will get back to this a little later when I talk about the Electors. In general, there are many artifacts in the church, but few decorations. It's kind of empty, yet all the sound you heard was the live sound of the cathedral. Just at that time, the organist was rehearsing here, much like the cathedral in Birmingham, which I have shown before. And yes, this is impressive, both in Birmingham and Trier. The exploration of Trier typically commences at the Roman amphitheater. There, as the Romans loved, there was quite a varied cultural life, although with a specific flavor. Here, for example, in the 4th century, the Frankish king Merogeus, defeated by Constantine the Great, was fed alive to wild animals. The amphitheater is located closer to the center, but not much remains of it, so I was not very impressed and decided to start with other ruins of the Roman period, the Imperial Baths of the 4th century. These baths, though never completed, offer a glimpse into the grandeur of ancient Roman leisure and governance. Business was discussed here, the right people met, and of course it was possible to relax here. What remains of the Imperial Baths are now impressively sized ruins and underground passages, so one can only imagine the scale of everything planned here. Moreover, in the Middle Ages they were rebuilt into a castle. The entrance to the former baths cost 3 or 4 euro, but you can get the general impression either by looking from the street or by climbing onto a pedestal of unknown purpose on the side of the park to the left of the entrance. The adjacent park and the palace facing the park are from a different era. It belonged to the so-called Elector or Kurfürst. I naively believed that this was just some kind of German medieval prince, but no, the Elector, among other things, also had all the virtues and rights of a king, and in addition could, and in fact was obliged to, elect an emperor, hence the name. There were only 7 such electors. 4 secular, the King of Bohemia, the Count Palatin of the Rhine, the Duke of Saxony, and the Margrave of Brandenburg, and 3 spiritual, the Archbishops of Mainz, Köln, and of course Trier. Moreover, the Archbishop of Trier was second in importance and was allowed to announce the results of the election of the emperor. The nobility have lived here since Roman times, and the current building was rebuilt in the rococo style in 1756. The surrounding garden, with sculptures by Ferdinand Tietz, is also from those times. The sculptures were cleaned a couple of years ago, but now they're somehow covered with something again. Sadly, after the capture of Trier by France in 1794, the palace was used as barracks. But please do not think that it was only the French who treated cultural heritage this way. After the city was returned to Prussia in 1814, the barracks remained there. The palace had another wing, which was demolished in 1850 to restore the Roman basilica built into the palace of the Electors. Remember I said that the local elector was the archbishop? They also wanted to demolish the existing part of the palace, but it was saved by an incredibly beautiful staircase, which even then was considered too valuable to destroy. Adjacent to the palace is building in a completely different style. Pure brick looks rather strange against the backdrop of rococo decorations, and in general, such a neighborhood is surprising. Meanwhile, it's one of the oldest surviving buildings in Trier, a Roman basilica, and at the same time the throne room of the emperors of the Holy Roman Empire. Built between 300 and 310 AD during the reign of Emperor Constantine, it's called the Aula Palatina, or Basilica of Constantine, although construction began under his father. It's surprising that the basilica, it turns out, never stood on its own. Some kind of auxiliary structures were always attached to it, so the palace of the Electors only continued this tradition. At different times, the basilica served not only as a throne room, but also as a hall for general meetings. It was decorated with marble, sculptures, and even heated despite its size. Some traces of the marble cladding are still visible from the outside at the back of the building. It feels absolutely huge inside, particularly because there are no supporting columns and the entire space remains visible. Remember, I already mentioned this in the monastery. It's the same here, but only on an even larger scale. There is no marble on the walls inside, so the brickwork is now visible. And you know, this does not spoil the feeling, as if this is real antiquity as intended. After all, the Colosseum in Rome should also historically be lined with marble. The coffered wooden ceiling is the result of restoration, after the basilica was completely burnt out during the Second World War during an air raid on August 14, 1944. In general, a rather interesting story happened to it. I'm not sure that the basilica would have survived otherwise, but nevertheless, in 1934, the Protestant community of Trier, unlike other communities in the region, did not join the anti-Nazi confessing church. Only a small group broke away from the main body, whose pastor was the only one who publicly condemned the closure of the synagogue in Trier in 1938. So the majority either tacitly or even actively supported the Nazi regime. So the church burned down. Already in 1945, the Protestant community admitted its guilt, but a sediment remained. The basilica, however, was restored by 1956, and 10 years later the bell from the nearby Red Tower was moved here. Today, the church inside is a rather interesting combination of obvious antiquity and absolute modernity. In decorations and even in the appearance of the organ, which was installed here in 2014. A little further behind the basilica, you can see the remnants of the demolished wing of the Electors' palace. What remains from it is this tower from 1647. It is called Red Tower and has such a strange roof because at one time it served as a bell tower until the Basilica of Constantine got its own. The portal of St. Petersburg, built in 1620, has nothing to do with the Russian city, but is named after St. Peter, considered the patron saint of Trier. Here is his sculpture above the portal. At the back, on the side of the demolished wing of the Electors' palace, there's a rather strange square and a sculpture that personifies the historical path of Trier, from the Celts to the present day. I wasn't very impressed with it, although the Renaissance door along the road is definitely worth a look. At this point, it became clear that something unusual was happening in the city. There was some noise in the distance, strange people walking around, some as if they had just come from a foam party. Everything became clear when we reached one of the squares along the road. The city hosted the Old Town Festival. Almost every square has a stage and people are having fun. And all this, of course, in the surroundings of the old city. What an atmosphere! Even the square where everyone was bathing in foam was also found a little later. There is, of course, also a festival in the central square. But here the oldest and most famous houses of Trier look directly into the scene. The most famous of them is the house with curlicues. It is sometimes called the Red House and it was originally built in 1684, but was lost during the Second World War and later restored. It is of course notable for its facade with the absolutely rollicking inscription. Trier was 1300 years before Rome. May it continue to stand and enjoy eternal peace. Well, sure, why not? The neighboring houses are also quite in the style of the Middle Ages. And the whole area, with one of the oldest markets in Germany existing since 958, is still used for its intended purpose. Flowers, fruits, plus every day except Wednesday, local wine is sold here. And the Mosel, whether you know it or not, is one of the wine regions of Germany. So there's quite a lot to try here. On the same square, there's a fountain with the classical virtues, just like in London at the Prince Albert Memorial. Justice, strength, moderation and wisdom, between which are tempting monkeys. And above all this rises a church of the 15th century, unhistorical for Trier, dedicated to a saint with an unpronounceable name, Gandalf. And of course, where would Germany be without the famous half-timbered buildings? Although the date on the house is 1605, one must understand that the area was damaged during the Second World War and much of it is a good restoration. But there remains, for example, an absolutely medieval passage to the Jewish quarter of Trier. Directly from the square, under one of the houses, you can go out into a narrow street leading to the Jewish quarter that existed in Trier since 1066. Here it's interesting to look at the Germany's oldest surviving residential building from 1311 with yellow-brown architraves. Its ground floor was rebuilt at the beginning of the 16th century, but the top has been preserved. Further, through the dense crowd of celebrants, you can reach the most famous landmark of Trier. The largest and the best preserved city gate north of the Alps is the Black Gate, Porta Nigra. Actually, this is a medieval name, as is the color that provoked it. When the Romans built this gate in 170 AD, the sandstone was normal light colored and then simply darkened over time. But the original Roman name has not been preserved and we still don't know what it was. Moreover, for some unknown reason, the gate was never completed, although the Romans had plenty of time for this. Perhaps they decided that the current state would be enough to protect the city. The fact is that these are real gates that formed part of the city's defensive structures, like the Alcalá gates in Madrid in one of my previous videos. Initially, there were 4 such gates at Trier, but only these have survived to this day. In the Middle Ages, the gates no longer had a defensive function, and they were taken away for building materials. In order to prevent them from being completely dismantled, it was decided to convert the gates into 2 churches, one above the other, for which they blocked off the courtyard and partially covered the gates and made another smaller one for the passage nearby. The upper church was intended for monks, and in the lower one anyone could pray. Here you can see the remains of the vaults, later demolished by order of Napoleon Bonaparte. He arrived in Trier in 1804 and according to legend, all those urban legends, at first he wanted to demolish the gates altogether. But according to one version, he was told that this was almost a Gallic building, and according to another, they still said that this was Roman, but one way or another he ordered everything to be returned to the state it was under the Romans. All in all, this is a very impressive structure, which is interesting to walk around and try to imagine that this colossus has been standing here for 2000 years, and the people who scurry around it have not seen a fraction of what these gates have seen. And I must admit, it was not always something romantic and beautiful. In the Middle Ages, Trier, along with Würzburg, Fulda and Bamberg, was one of the centers for witch hunts. It is not known for certain how many people were burnt here, according to various estimates from 368 to more than 1,000 people, and these are only those who were burnt alive in the city itself. It would certainly be better if they executed Hitler, who at one time was awarded an honorary citizenship. It's good that this title is automatically lost with the death of a citizen, so now everything is in order. But okay, let's move on, and along the narrow streets past the 13th century building, which was the residence of the local mayor and the court and the monastery and the school and now serves as a youth center, you can finally reach the oldest cathedral in Germany, St. Peter's Basilica. According to legend, it was built by the same Emperor Constantine on the site of the palace of his mother, Empress Helena. Whether this is true or not is unknown, but her skull is indeed kept in the cathedral. Some other artifacts are also kept there. One of the nails used in the crucifixion, a reliquary with a piece of the sandal of St. Andrew and the bird of St. Peter, and the tunic of Christ. As usual, one of at least 3 official ones, although several other churches too think that they have the original. Come on, it's normal. I'm rather indifferent to such things, but the cathedral is interesting indeed. Archaeological excavations have shown that it really stands on the foundations of more ancient Roman buildings, so it may well be that it's not a story about Helena's palace. And at one time it was the largest such structure outside of Rome. Although of course the church looked different then. The first time it was destroyed by the Franks, who recaptured Trier from the Romans. Then in 882 the restored church was destroyed by the Vikings, and only by 1196 the next restoration and construction of the western facade, which has survived to this day, was finally completed. Opposite the cathedral you can still admire another half-timbered structure, or you can go further through the central square. Past another square with a St. George once again killing yet another dragon and furnished with endless cafes, you can go down Fleischstrasse to a funny fountain with a grasshopper. This is such a not very historical attraction depicting local originals. This is, for example, local grocer Matthias Fischer. He walked the streets with a pipe and slippers and an oriental robe and came up with jokes, which after his death were enough for 4 books. But I didn't come here for the local freaks, of course. Here right opposite stands this house, with a memorial plaque and a profile known to many. Karl Marx was born here. Although the entire house is now a museum, the Marx family did not occupy it entirely. Only 2 rooms on the ground floor and 3 on the first. It seems that Marx the father moved the family from here to another larger house not far from Porta Nigra when little Karl was only a year old. The museum is very popular among Chinese tourists. I wonder if they're told that, for example, during his student days, Marx was a member of the student union, whose main virtues were the ability to drink for days and engage in duels. One way or another, the whole story, which changed the destinies of so many people, began here. In general, Trier treats this heritage quite tenderly. Even the nearest pedestrian crossing is regulated by Marx himself. The same street further leads to another landmark, but now it shows an amazing combination of antique shops of varying degrees of interest and strip clubs. Everyone has fun as they see fit. This of course does not confuse or offend anyone, and in general, everyone gives each other the opportunity to live their own lives and does not pry into other people's pants at all. Now, another historical landmark of Trier appeared, and it is of course also from the Roman times. This is a bridge that was originally made of wood in 17 BC, and after that was once again rebuilt in wood, but in the 2nd century AD it was finally rebuilt in stone. And guess what? It's been standing here since that 2nd century. Moreover, it's still in use today. Just think about it, it's 2000 years old. The canvas was changed twice, at the beginning of the 12th and at the beginning of the 18th centuries, and was repaired one more time after American troops captured the bridge on the morning of 2nd March 1945 and liberated Trier from the Nazis. Over time, only 2 of the bridge's 7 pillars were replaced. This happened during the wars with France, when the French tried to blow up the bridge. Well, I must admit, the Romans built it to glory. And all this antiquity is still used for its intended purpose. The Mosel flows slowly under the bridge, overseeing the ripening vineyards, which the Romans also brought here, by the way. Like the entire winemaking culture, in this case they approached it wisely, not imposing their habits on the Celts, but instead demonstrating them in such a way that the Celts themselves wanted to adopt them. One of these adopted habits was the use of baths, so beloved by the Romans. I have already shown the Imperial Baths, but for such a large city, in Roman times between 70 and 100,000 people lived in it, which is only slightly less than its current size of 110,000. It's funny that in the Middle Ages there were only 6,000 people left in the city. So such a large city of course could not limit itself to just one baths. The very first were the baths near the Forum. They were next to the imperial ones which I showed earlier but are worse preserved. The second, the so-called Barbara Baths, are located near the historical bridge. They were built when the first ones could not longer accommodate everyone. It's even somehow strange to name these numbers again, but they were built in the second half of the 2nd century. Just look at what the Romans built 2000 years ago and think what was there where you live at that moment. After the fall of the Roman Empire, the buildings were used as the basis for future buildings. A couple of Christian churches were built on the old foundations, and then, in the course of general degradation, all this was gradually used as a source of building materials. In particular, they were used to build a Jesuit college, which was eventually demolished, but the remnants of the baths are still there and very interesting to see. They really are impressive. By modern standards, this is an entire block. It's impossible to go down now, but there is a pedestrian passage over the ruins, on which everything is shown, what was there and how it worked. I mean, it's really very impressive. In general, Trier made a surprisingly solid impression. It is of course very historical, but this history is not a museum story, but it is absolutely alive. You can touch it, you can go inside, walk along it to the other side of the river, and in general I must admit that Trier lives very organically around its heritage. Is it worth coming here? In my opinion, for such a small area, it has the highest concentration of historic monuments in all of Germany. It's a living testament to Germany's past, beckoning travelers to immerse themselves in its timeless charm. So definitely yes, it's worth it. Moreover, there are still many interesting and exciting places around. But that's all I have about Trier for now. Thank you very much for your company today and see you in the next episode. Auf Wiedersehen. Trier.
Time.